all these previous conclusions into a general cohesive argument about the relationship that all individuals have in society. Basically says, yes, oppression exists, but it exists because it is useful and it has a value to it. And so the answer for the existence of intrinsic value in academia and its ongoing relevance in a society that is built up of oppression is intrinsic value must be useful. There must be a reason why people are pushing this idea that diamonds are naturally valuable. There must be a useful reason to those in power who are upholding this idea that a coin printed and stamped by the government has a value. There must be something that's causing them to think of that as useful. So to explain this, he breaks down the reason why people exchange things in a society. He comes up with two formulas. And you might have to write this down. Otherwise, I can send you like little snippets of my notes when we're done. So the first equation or the first formula is CMC, commodity, money, commodity. So one commodity is exchanged for money, and then that money is used to buy other commodities. We basically call this a system of barter. I have a phone, and I want a new phone. So I'm going to take this and sell it and use some of that money in addition to other things that I sell in order to buy a new phone. That is the CMC equation pretty much summed up. Marx was using it to also suggest that C could be your labor. So labor is a commodity. It has a value. It can be exchanged. So I sell my free time and I earn a wage for that. I earn money. And then I take that money and buy other commodities. I pay my rent. I pay my electric bill. I pay for the food for my cats. I buy my own food. I buy, video games. Like, that is how human beings function in a capitalist economy. They sell their free time, get money for it, and then use that money to buy their means of living. The second formula that he pointed out was MCM, money, commodity, money. Sometimes at the very end of the second M, he would put a little apostrophe above it to suggest or inform you that the second M is a higher value than the first M. So I take a bunch of money and I buy something, and then I turn around and sell it for a higher value of money. Can you think of an example of like someone doing that in today's society?
Um, like without putting any sort of extra labor into the commodity, or oh, oh Lord. Oh Lord. This is a technical difficulty. Oh Lord. That was weird.
So I think I know exactly what happened there. I think it was because the second lesson, it like ended the first lesson at 6:30, like instantly,
Ah, okay.
because there was a second one going on. So, but anyway, were you in the middle of asking something?
Yeah, so you were asking about an example of like money, commodity, money.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I was asking an example of money, commodity, money, where the second money is like more than the first money. And I guess my question is like, is that without putting labor into the commodity or like,
Correct,
okay, so
correct.
just like reselling.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
well, like sneakers, like people do that all the time.
Yeah, or like flipping a house.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like I buy a house for $1 million and then I sell it to someone else, some other sucker for $2 million. I made $1 million profit off of that. And so you can actually even shorten the MCM equation to just be MM because in many ways the C is irrelevant. The person who's trying to get from the first part of the equation to the second part of the equation doesn't really give a damn about what it is that's getting them that advanced amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
All that they care about is getting to that advanced M, if that makes sense. Um, so note that this is not what we might refer to as profit. Okay, this is not profiting off of something. This is merely the difference between the starting and the end values of the equation. But if we follow the idea of the labor theory of value, which suggests that labor is not just exchangeable, but that it has a concrete value to it, and we put it into these equations, we end up with a very strange scenario. If the above equations are rational and they are true, and the labor theory of value is also true, then this increase of value from M to M in MCM must come from labor. Because if all value is the result of human beings creating things, then the increased value of MCM must also somehow be related to labor. How can we do that? Mark says, the answer is to place labor into that commodity section of the MCM equation. So a factory owner, for example, goes and buys up a bunch of free labor time of workers, pays them a wage for it, and then uses the things that they produce in his factory, his or her factory, to sell on the market for money. That's the MCM equation as well. So flipping a house is no different from owning a factory. The difference is that in flipping a house, it doesn't necessarily require labor. But in owning a factory and producing things and selling them out on the market, it does, as we've already covered. If you remove labor from that equation, you don't make any money. But once labor is in the equation, the operation succeeds and you make money. So this isn't very much a stretch either. We know from a fact that the CMC equation is also an example of us selling our labor, C, to get money, a wage, M, and then using that to pay for our rent, C. So the idea of labor functioning as a commodity fits in both of these equations, according to Marx. The more work someone does on a build, for example, the more money that they are eventually going to want for that process. Or conversely, the more hours that someone works on a project, the more money that they are going to expect for that project at the end of its completion. So if labor can be a C, and thus explains CMC as the equation for how people sell their labor for a value and then use that to survive, how is labor paid in the MCM equation? Where is that value realized, or who takes home the majority of that value during the CM phase? I'm sorry, let me start at the other one. So there's a buying and a selling of that MCM formula. Um, Following the logic, C remains labor, which in the middle of the MCM formula means that someone is, quote, buying labor from the MC phase of the equation. During the CM phase, the second phase of it, the value of whatever is being made, shoes, cars, cigarettes, whatever, it is advanced to be higher than that of the original cost. And it has to be. Otherwise, there's no point in engaging in this operation. But who keeps most of the surplus value in a scenario like this? So Ford Motor Company hires up a bunch of people to work in its factory and build cars. Who sees the majority of the value received back by selling those cars? The workers, The managers of the factories, or is it the owner of the factory that receives the majority of the money?
Probably the owners.
Yeah, it's usually the owners, unless we're in like a business co-op in which everyone kind of has equal share in the return of the money. Now, in older artisanal forms of Western civilization, it would usually you'd have this arrangement where you had like the master craftsman, the master tailor, or the master blacksmith, etc., and they absorbed most of the surplus. But they would also have their students, the apprentices, and they would not be paid for their work inside the artisanal shop. But do you know, or can you think of what it is that apprentices did get, which made them like willing to participate in this whole operation?
Experience.
That's one. That's one of them. But they also got free room and board,
Hmm.
and they got free food. So there was a kind of an operation that was going on that was making it successful and profitable for everyone that was involved. So what's happening in this scenario in contemporary capitalism, Marx is trying to argue, is a sophisticated operation where the owner of the landowner or the property owner, however you want to describe them, has purchased the labor of countless other individuals to one, tend the land so that it can be used for a factory, two, build a factory for, say, making shirts, three, inspect the factory, make sure that it's running efficiently and that it's running legally and that it's not going to run into any issues with the government. Four, maintain the machines that are helping the workers make the shirts, and then the workers themselves to actually operate the machines. So the owner of the factory has to pay all of this labor in order for this whole operation to even begin getting off the ground. But all throughout the process of transforming this non usable land into a highly productive shirt making enterprise, okay, the surplus value primarily goes to one person, the landowner. The cost of labor is not considered to be part of the surplus value. So that's the distinguishing factor between profit and surplus value. If I own a factory and the I it produces 100 shirts a day and I charge $5 for each shirt, each day that factory is making a profit of $500. But there's also the cost of the whole operation of those five things that I explained. So it costs me maybe $10 to pay for maintenance fees. It maybe costs another $10 to pay for taxes and legal fees and stuff like that. And then maybe it costs me $150 to pay for the workers of the factory each day. So 10 plus 10 is 20, plus another 10 is 30, plus 150 is 180. So 500 minus 180, that's $320. So my surplus value is $320. Make sense?
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Okay. So everyone else, however, from the lenders to the tax collector to the person who's overseeing and maintaining the machines to the workers themselves, they cannot logically be paid part of the surplus value. If you were to do so, the whole operation would become pointless. You wouldn't be making any money. Your profits and your personal return would be so low that the operation would be pointless. You would just be like, why am I doing this? This is a waste of time. So, thus, coming full circle, Marx argues in Das Kapital, the landowner does not pay those individuals a percentage of the profit, but rather pays them according to the clock. So, what a wage earner makes has nothing to do with the amount that is actually profited by the business. It's more fixed based on time spent. That's why we have $8 an hour, $10 an hour, $15 an hour, etc. Doesn't matter what you're producing, doesn't matter if what you're producing is highly valuable or it's just a cheeseburger, you're still paid the same rate by the hour. Make sense?
Makes sense.
Now, I sometimes see memes that make fun of this. And the meme usually ends with like Karl Marx at the bottom going like Marxism intensifies and his eyes get all red and stuff like that. And I'll see someone saying like that they work at McDonald's and they'll be like, in 1 hour of working at McDonald's, I can afford to buy 2 cheeseburgers. But during that hour, I literally made and sold 70 cheeseburgers. How does that make sense?
Right.
So that's what Marx is pointing out with these equations here, is that there's a fundamental breakdown and difference between the people who are buying and selling the labor power of people, the capitalists or the bourgeoisie, and then the people who are forced to sell that labor power to them in order to survive, the quote unquote proletariat. And finally, we've kind of arrived at Marx's breakdown of how does oppression in our society function? It functions along this basis. Um, so let's make sure that I'm not missing any point here. Yes, so this is the ruse. Marx would complain the reason for maintaining faith in intrinsic value is that the labor theory of value, if we were to go around teaching everyone the labor theory of value and teaching it as canon, like we taught students in economic classes intrinsic value is absolute nonsense. Nothing is valuable because we say it has value. It's only valuable because someone produced it. That message contains with it the whole purpose of class consciousness and the means by which people would say, oh, well, then there's why am I engaging in this society? Like, why am I doing this? Like, we should just overthrow it. So if we started this whole conversation at trying to break down how is intrinsic value useful, why does it linger around in our society, when we know that there's this other explanation for value called the labor theory of value. Well, after 40 something years of Marx doing all these writings, when he publishes Das Kapital, he basically argues the reason is quite simple. It's a breakdown between those who are owning property and those who own the means of production versus those who don't have access to owning production, and they must sell themselves in this process. Once again, reifying the whole idea that the workers have nothing to lose but their chains. They just need to get over this idea of intrinsic value. They need to embrace the labor theory of value.
Okay, so I have a couple questions.
Okay.
Um, how does intrinsic value or the theory or the idea of intrinsic value show up in like a day-to-day job, like a McDonald's situation? Um, how does intrinsic value show up in that example? Um, I guess like my other question is like, it seems like with that statement you were like, oh well, there's no way the surplus profit, is that the correct term, surplus profit?
Surplus value.
Surplus value. There's no way that surplus value could be sort of evenly distributed amongst all the people involved in the operation. Otherwise, it would be sort of like pointless for the owner. Um, well, I would like to say that it wouldn't be pointless because it's okay to sort of share. But I mean, I feel like maybe you're like suggesting a larger point that maybe instead of like, I don't know, like engaging in this system as an owner and sort of like not receiving a lot of like revenue, it seems like you're suggesting, or maybe Marx is suggesting, that it's better to just do away with the entire system and like do something different. Um, and I guess my other question is like, is it the case that the labor theory of value is not as readily understood and taught in America or in the West because of some sort of like intentional, like, sneaky reason? Or yeah, I guess those are my questions.
Yeah, I think it's easiest to go backwards in that line of questioning. So one of the reasons why the intrinsic value is so dominant in our society is because the labor theory of value is taught as an alternative to it. And people will say, like, if you go to a business school, all right, and you ask them, how do I find value? Most people in that school are going to tell you value is whatever you can get for something.
Hmm.
Like, if I can sell uh you know uh a shirt that is basically just a collar and someone will buy it for $1,000, that shirt that is just a collar is worth $5,000. That's what they would conclude. um but you can see that comes with a caveat to it. It also basically suggests that, well, if I can engage in slavery for a profit, then what's wrong with that? Like, it's producing values. So yeah, economists these days, it's not like it's not a conspiracy. People know, they can go look up the labor theory of value if they really want. And if you go far enough into studying philosophy and economics, you will come across it. But it's not going to be taught to you the way that Marx treats it, which is that this is the truth. This is the absolute truth. And if you look at it another way, you are avoiding the truth. It's almost like you're in denial. Your first question was, where in the McDonald's example would intrinsic value sit? Most people, when they go out to go make or to go buy food from a restaurant, they assume that they're going to have to pay money for it, correct? Mm-hmm. Now, do they sit there and think about how much the workers of the restaurant are being paid?
Probably not.
Probably not. But they just assume, I'm going to have to pay some kind of money for this. Mm-hmm. Well, that is the intrinsic value there. They're assuming there's an attached value to it, regardless of how it's made, who's making it, how long it takes to make it, all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. So there's where intrinsic value, kind of like a fetish, exists in our minds. Like, everything is valued. And if I don't pay for something, I feel like, oh, I'm not doing something right. I'm cheating someone because I'm not giving them a value. Well, is what you're paying for them, is that actually a value that they earned and they deserve? Did the McDonald's Corporation earn your money by providing the cheeseburgers? Or did the workers in that McDonald's store provide you the cheeseburgers? Who did it? Is it both? Is it one or the other? So intrinsic value is just kind of laden in the idea that people assume value is there, even if it's not.
I mean, I figure if I were to ask somebody, why do you think that hamburger costs money? I feel like they would say, oh, well, because somebody put in the work to, like, make it. So is that assumption, like, automatically crossing into labor theory, or is that a part of intrinsic theory?
It's part of intrinsic theory. Okay. So think of it like this. I could go to McDonald's tonight. I could grab a double quarter pounder, something like that. I might pay $6 or $7 for it. But I could also go to the store and I could buy ground beef. I could buy lettuce, buy tomatoes, onions, buns, and do all that sort of stuff and make it for myself. What do you think I'm going to value more when I'm eating it?
Probably the one you made yourself would be, like, maybe healthier or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it might be healthy, but why else would I value that? Because I made it. I did it. I made myself a cheeseburger. It's almost like, you remember that do you ever see the movie Castaway?
Yeah.
There's a great example of the labor theory of value in one scene of that movie where Tom Hanks is, like, trying to create fire. Mm-hmm. Now, he's not, like, in the past. He's not a caveman. He's a man who's stranded on an island. But when he's able to do what cavemen could do and manifest fire on his own without the means of a lighter or anything else, he did it just from the raw materials of that island. How happy was he?
Elated.
He was, that was the peak of his happiness for that entire experience. So he stands there like, I have made fire. Like, I can't even believe it. So that right there is a great example of the labor theory of value. Like, fire is valuable. Yes, we can think of it as useful in terms of its value, but in terms of its use in the moment, its use for me when I need it, that's dependent upon my labor. That's dependent on either me using my labor or me buying someone else's labor.
I still think I don't know if I understand fully the difference, or maybe you could, like, use a different example.
Okay, so let's imagine we're doing an operation in which we're selling t-shirts. It's kind of like the other example I was using before. There's another big concept called the tendency for profit rates to fall, which might explain this distance between intrinsic and labor theories of value. Over time, if I'm operating a company that's making shirts, over time, I'm going to run into a problem of, like, competition. I'm going to run into the fact that there's things like inflation, and that the cost of materials go up over time. So I'm going to constantly be having to play this battle with my factory in which I want that $380 surplus value that we calculated before. I want it. Like, that's how I live. But when the cost of things and operating that factory start to go up, it's going to slowly go from 380 to 370 to 360 to 350. I'm going to begin losing my rate of profit. So I have to counter that. My way of countering that is to cut labor costs, fire a couple of people, upgrade the machines, etc. But in doing so, I'm fundamentally leaning on the fact that labor is valuable. It has to be valuable. Otherwise, why would the cost of labor start to go up as society becomes more and more sophisticated? So, because their cost of living goes up, their cost of food goes up, their cost of rent and everything goes up. Thus, they're going to come to me and say, "Hey, I need a bigger wage. I need a salary increase. I need something. Otherwise, I'm going to go work for another company." So the company owner has to make these adjustments and arrangements, but it's all based upon this notion that without the labor force there, this whole operation ceases. It's not going to work. So labor has to contain value. If we use these examples on a day-to-day basis and we accept them as true, and we accept the idea, like in the Castaway example, that like I find value in me physically spending my human capacity to make things, that explains the labor theory of value. Its contrast with intrinsic value is that I'm assuming that the operation of owning the factory must give me money. You hear this sometimes when capitalists say, well, I'm taking all the risk. Like, why should I pay my workers more money when I'm the one who invested all the money into this business? I took $500,000 and I bought a factory and I paid for land and I paid for inspectors and I hired up all these people. I'm the one who's losing all the money. That's them using intrinsic value. They're saying my role as an investor is fundamentally valuable. Well, is it? Or is it the arrangement of society that is permitting that individual to claim that their existence is valuable? Marx would certainly say that the only reason why a capitalist finds their investments valuable is because they live in a society that values those investments.
Yeah, I feel like the labor theory makes such like intuitive sense. It's like the intrinsic side of it that I'm struggling to wrap my mind around. It's like, okay, like you bought a factory or you took out a loan or whatever, and it's producing value, but obviously why? Um,
Yeah, and it does kind of seem dubious to us today. Like I get your struggle to understand because it's almost like, well, duh, like how is this even like a thing? I get that, but you've got to realize in the long time frame of human history, Karl Marx making these conclusions in the mid 19th century, that is like a micro bit of time in contrast to how long intrinsic value and the idea that everything is naturally valued has been dominant in our society. That idea is as old as religion. That idea is tens of thousands, if not millions of years old. Like the second that someone came out of a cave and looked at a rock of gold and said, "Ooh, I like the way that this sparkles more than this granite," that's when intrinsic value spawned into our consciousness.
uh huh. I get it, but I don't know if I get it because it's just I don't. How does intrinsic value work in a system where we have all of these different moving parts and variables? Like you mentioned like inflation, and then you mentioned like other things that might affect your bottom line. How does that mesh with the idea that things are just inherently what they are?
It's kind of Marx saying that it's a conspiracy, and that there are it's kind of Marx saying that there are forces at work who are actively trying to stop us from accepting the labor theory of value.
Hmm.
And that's why I brought up the idea of a business school, to keep on this like motif of constantly using like movies as a metaphor. Have you seen The Wolf of Wall Street?
I have.
So there's a scene with Matthew McConaughey and Leonardo DiCaprio when they're in like a restaurant at the top of, I think, the World Trade Center. And he makes a great appeal to intrinsic value. He says, nobody, I guarantee you, nobody knows if the price of a stock is going to go up or down. It doesn't matter. What's most important is that you're selling when it's high and you're buying when it's low. Like fuck the buyers. Like it doesn't matter who's buying the stocks. Like we don't care about them. All that we care about is extracting the value out of the exchange of these things. That is him definitely saying like I don't give a fuck who makes what in this society. Like labor theory of value be damned. All that I care about is that I'm getting something out of it. Does that kind of does that not help make it more sense?
Um, I don't really. I can't say that I really. I don't know. Like, what am I supposed to walk away with understanding about intrinsic value? Well, I mean,
that that according to Marx, it is something that is useful to maintaining capitalist society. As long as everyone just assumes that things are valuable, that idea is useful in preventing people from going and studying the labor theory of value. Because if everyone goes and studies the LTV and everyone comes to the conclusion that yes, everything valuable in society is the result of human labor, then there is no reason anyone would show up to work the next day. No one would show up to work. They'd be like, fuck that. Like I can engage in a general strike. I can shut this whole society down by everyone not going to work.
so
And that's also why Marx leans on a general strike once the Paris Commune comes around in 1870.
in the intrinsic value sort of perspective, is it to say that from the worker's perspective, they are under the assumption that the job is giving value to them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In a very similar way to that, the apprentice in the artisanal system. He's not receiving a wage, but he's receiving room and board and, like you said, experience. So they find that intrinsically valuable. That's why they are participating in it. But they're nevertheless being exploited by the master craftsman. The master craftsman is not paying them an equal proportion of the value that the business is making.
They could.
They could. You're right. Like in a co-op, they certainly could.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that our society has developed, co-ops and those sort of systems have never been dominant. Um, and once we get into like, if we want to eventually start talking about Leninist theory, he provides an explanation for that. He says that's because the state is part of it. The state profits from all of this. How do they profit from it? Taxes. They tax the businesses, they tax the landowners, they tax income, and they tax the sale of goods. So the state has every reason to maintain this whole operation of buying and selling labor power.
Gotcha. Okay.
I know it's we definitely get into some pretty heavy philosophy when we talk about Karl Marx and Das Kapital. It is that's why it's such an influential piece, and most of what I talked about today just comes out of Volume 1. Volume 2 is when he introduces this idea of the tendency for profit rates to fall, and I'll have to save that for another time because it is 7 o'clock. But did you feel like you got a little bit more of an understanding there than about intrinsic value by the end?
Well, no, I mean, obviously, in general, I feel like our meetings are great. Like, I feel like I'm learning something every single time. I feel like I will have to do some more, like, watch some YouTube videos on, like, intrinsic value, try to wrap my head around it. Um, but,
I'll also give you a couple of the readings out of the German ideology and like the first chapter of Das Kapital, which is called the commodity, in which he breaks down everything in society has a use value and exchange value. Intrinsic value leans on the exchange component, but the labor theory of value leans on the use value, and that these things kind of bounce back and forth against each other.
okay. Okay. I'll look forward to
Sound
it.
good?
Sounds good.
I'll send you those links tonight. It was great talking with you. Let me know either in a message like what time frames coming up work for you. I'm probably going to be a lot more free and open after this weekend because the move will be done. So.
Cool. Cool.
But all right, great chatting with you, and it was no issue doing an extra hour. I thought it was probably actually very productive towards getting to the final end of this discussion. But yeah, so just send me that message. I'll send you the links, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Professor. I'll see you around.
All right, take it easy.